Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all to a brand new video. Today's video, we're going to be ranking the first four albums by Def Leppard. And Def Leppard is a band that really doesn't need that much of an introduction, but just in case you may not be too familiar with who they are, but they are a English rock band formed in the late 1970s, had a slew of successful hits and massive selling albums during the 1980s, and they've continued to be a staple within mainstream rock. Even today, they continue to do hugely successful tours. They've released a few albums here and there, recent material. I think the last album they put out was the self-titled album that came out back in 2015. But yeah, they just recently got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and such. But yeah, they've remained a staple within mainstream rock. However you may feel about them, I know a lot of people don't care too much for stuff that they did later after the '80s or whatever. But yeah, today, man, we're gonna get into these first four records that they did, and we're gonna start with my number four, which is their biggest selling album, Hysteria, released in 1987. Yeah, this was the band's biggest selling album. Tremendous success. Album had nine singles. Had nine singles released off of it. So pretty much had majority of the album was full of singles. A good bit of them were released in the UK though. But yeah, still a massive success. And I know for most people who are like day one fans of Def Leppard, this was the record that pretty much turned them off from them. But some things that I actually like about the record is I think it has awesome harmonies. You know, the album presents like this wall of harmonies that the band really do well. I guess the best way to put it is like these multi-layered vocals that give it like this wall of sound. I really enjoy that. The record is very melodic, and I think it has the epitome of an '80s rock album. A lot of times when I put this record on, it just gives me that vibe of like late 1980s. Like it just puts you in that. It just puts you in that mood, and I think it was a well produced record. Even though I do think it was a little bit overproduced, which leads me to some of my negatives about the record. I mean, for one thing, it's got some overplayed hits. I mean, how many times have we heard "Pour Some Sugar on Me"? I mean, I really wouldn't care to hear that song again. It's just a song. I mean, they play it all the time on my job. It's always on the radio. It's in commercials. That song is just everywhere. So it's definitely one of those songs that has been killed by radio, and I wouldn't care if I never heard that song again. Uh, and even though I did say that the album was well produced, I think that it's overproduced too. The production on here is very slick and glossy, and there's a lot of times when I'm listening to Hysteria, I'm kind of wondering in the back of my mind, is there really an actual band playing on here? Because sometimes the production just seems a bit too processed in some instances on a lot of these songs. I mean, don't get me wrong, it sounds great. I think for 1987, this was one of the best sounding albums, but it's just sometimes it just feels a little bit too artificial in some places. And it's pretty much like an absence of the whole, like their whole heavy rock, kind of bluesy southern rock influence that they had on the earlier records. That whole side of the band is pretty much non-existent on this record. And probably the biggest thing about it, negative, well, not necessarily a negative, but this was the last album that they did with Steve Clark, one of the lead guitarists in the band. Of course, he ended up passing away about 4 years later in 1991. But I don't think that Hysteria is a terrible album per se. I actually listened to the album quite a bit. I kind of got in the mood to want to listen to it here a couple of days ago. But I think it's a really good. I think it's a good album. I think it's one of the best sounding uh, rock albums of the '80s. And I'm not somebody that just hates it and just kind of throws it aside, man. I actually enjoy the record quite a bit, but I just don't think that it holds up as good as the next few albums that I ranked higher. So yeah, that's Hysteria coming in at number 4. And so now we're gonna get to my number 3. And some of you are probably gonna be upset about this, but hey, it is what it is. I chose On Through the Night, released in 1980. This is the band's debut album. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. This is a really good album. I like it. It was a solid debut album. But you gotta understand, this is a young band. You know, these guys were what, in their late teens, early 20s, fresh out of high school, probably most of them. And this is probably the heaviest and rawest album that the band ever put out. I mean, it has a lot of that British heavy metal influence. And you know, at the time, Def Leppard actually had got lumped into the whole new wave of British heavy metal. Although they were the most like commercially viable band out of there. I mean, even with this being their heaviest record, there's definitely more of a commercial and radio friendly approach to the songwriting on here. But so let's get into some of the positives about this record. Like I said, it's their rawest album, and I really enjoy that bluesy Southern hard rock influence that they have on this record. Steve Clark and Pete Willis, because Phil Collen isn't in the band at this point. Uh, Great combination, those two, man. They present that kind of twin guitar attack, and it's just really steeped in like that Southern bluesy hard rock. It's all over this album, man. That's one thing that I really enjoy about it. And then of course, like I said earlier, the whole new wave of British heavy metal influence. There's a lot of songs on here that harken to that, you know, such as When the Walls Come Tumbling Down, Answer to the Master, Overture, just a few songs that really harken to that whole British heavy metal scene that was emerging in the late 70s and early 80s around this time. And yeah, you know, it's their most heavy metal sounding album. I think this is the most metal that Def Leppard has ever sounded when it is on this record. And there's some other great songs on here, man, like Wasted. Wasted is a fan favorite. I believe they just recently started bringing that song back into their live shows. I believe it's the only song that they actually play from this album live. Rock Brigade, which opens up the album, a awesome opener. Let's see, what else? Rocks Off, It Don't Matter. It Don't Matter is one of the best examples of that bluesy Southern hard rock style that I've been talking about on this record. Steve Clark and Pete Willis, man, they even implement some slide guitar in the riffs on that particular song, man. So let's go to some of the negatives about this record for me. I don't really care for the song "Hello America," which is the second song on the album. I think that was the single. Yeah, it was one of the singles. It was released in the UK. Yeah, I'm not too crazy about that song. I usually skip it when I listen to this album. Yeah, you can pretty much tell with this song that the band was really shooting for that American market, and of course they did achieve it. But I'm just not really crazy about the song at all. I usually skip it. Yeah, the production on here is a little rough, even though it was produced by Tom Allum, who did a lot of production for Judas Priest. I don't know, my CD version, I don't know. To me, the production doesn't sound that great compared to the records that would come next when they hooked up with producer Mutt Lange. So that you got that, and then of course, there's not too many memorable moments for me on this record. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some great songs on here, but I usually just go for Rock Brigade, Wasted, Rocks Off, It Don't Matter, and sometimes When the Walls Come Tumbling Down. When the Walls Come Tumbling Down. And that's usually about it, man. Every once in a while, I might get in the mood to want to listen to the album all the way through. But for the most part, I just stick to those particular songs that I just mentioned. And yeah, that's just me personally. Other people might think that every song on here is just awesome, but that's just me. And of course, you know, this was a young band. You know, like I said, they were young. I think Rick Allen was still a teenager. He might have been like 17 years old or 16. I'm not sure, but he was the youngest one in the band. He's always been the youngest one in the band, I believe, until Vivian Campbell joined. I don't know how old Vivian Campbell is, but anyway, man, all these guys were young. All of them were like fresh out of high school and so forth. So it's this is a young band still trying to find their sound. You know, they had it sounds great. You know, the music is good, the songwriting's a bit strong, but you know they just haven't hit their stride just yet. So, but other than that, man, I think On Through the Night was a solid debut album. Uh, and it's not really one that I think they play live a lot, except for the song "Wasted," which they just recently started bringing back into their live shows. But it would be killer to hear "Rocks Off" and "It Don't Matter" and even "Rock Brigade" live again. But yeah, you know, like I said, it's a young band, but definitely a solid debut. Definitely a solid debut album from these young guys at the time. All right, so that was my number 3. So my number 2 is Pyromania. Yeah, and I'm just go ahead and tell you, I actually switched On Through the Night and Pyromania because On Through the Night was actually originally number 2, but started listening to Pyromania and I was like, nah, I gotta switch these. Yeah, man, Pyromania. I'm just going ahead and say it. Pyromania is one of my favorite Def Leppard albums. I'm not gonna tell you what my favorite Def Leppard album is. My number 1 favorite one, but most of you can probably already guess which one it is. It's not that hard to figure out. But yeah, Pyromania is my second favorite Def Leppard album. Man, this is a really good album. Really good album. Very, very cohesive. I mean, every track on here, in my opinion, is killer. Even the song "Photograph." Even the song "Photograph," and that song is another one that's become a staple on classic rock radio. But man, Pyromania is just killer. And you know something? A lot of people still enjoy Pyromania. A lot of old school metalheads, they still enjoy that album. They still enjoy Pyromania. I think for a lot of people, this was the last one for them. And then Hysteria came out, and they kind of, you know, just kind of moved on from Def Leppard. But Pyromania still holds a special place for a lot of Def Leppard fans. So let's get into some of my positives about this record. Yeah, it's a good blend of the heavy hard rock roots, and as well as them moving more towards a commercial radio sound. Yeah, like you can definitely tell the difference from On Through the Night in the second album on Pyromania. You can definitely tell that the band is going for that more broader, like arena rock type style, anthemic type style with their with the music. Man, you can tell that they wrote the songs on this album for the big stadiums, for the big arenas. You can tell that. But the music sounds good. It sounds good. And they still maintain their roots on this record. And then, of course, the great harmonies, which is something you're probably going to be hearing from me a lot about Def Leppard. That's what really draws me into Def Leppard, is those harmonies. I don't know how they sound now, but back then, during this era, they had some really awesome harmonies that just really, they just sound great. You know, it's what really draws me into their music as well. And then this album has a lot of great album cuts, man. You know, aside from, you know, the single "Photograph," you got the album opener, Rock Till You Drop, Stage Fright, Coming Under Fire, which was one of my personal favorites, Rock of Ages, which was one of the singles, but a great single at that. And then Too Late for Love, which is a ballad, and one of Def Leppard's best ballads. And it's not a cheesy, cringy ballad either. This is a heavy ballad. It's a heavy ballad. Yes, it's slower, but it's still heavy and packs a punch. So let's get into the negatives. Some overplayed hits. You know, you got the single "Photograph." Let's be real. "Photograph" is very overplayed. You know, it's one of their signature songs in my opinion. And yeah, you hear it everywhere. But there's something about Photograph that I feel where that song is it's a lot more tolerable compared to say Pour Some Sugar on Me. Cause I kind of go back and forth with Photograph. You know, there's days where I hear it and I'm like, oh man, we're hearing Photograph again. And then there's other days where it comes on and it's like, yeah, Photograph. You know, so that song, even though I do agree that it's an overplayed hit, it's a lot more tolerable compared to Pour Some Sugar on Me from Hysteria. And it's also a great song. I mean, perfect harmonies on this record by the band. Perfect harmonies. Just an alright, awesome track. A great song to ride to. You know, if you're out driving around, running errands, it's still a great song. But yeah, it's definitely overplayed. And you know, the beginning of the commercial leaning sound. You can definitely hear the band leaning more towards that radio friendly sound on this record. And unfortunately, they just went even further with it. It would have been nice if they could have kind of just stayed in this lane, but I don't think that's what Def Leppard is about. Uh, it was just a good marriage for them to have that hard rock style blend with that radio friendly sound. It was just a good marriage, and I think they really could have. I think they really could have honed in on that and continue to make some awesome records in that vein. I mean, imagine Hysteria if they had kept that hard rock influence on the record. But other than that, you know, it's a pretty this is a good album. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites, and this was also the first album with Phil Collen, and technically this is the last album with Pete Willis. He was kicked out of the band, I think, after the recording of the album. Yeah, I think he was kicked out of the band for alcohol problems or whatever. I think it was right after the recording of the record. Phil Collen came in and did the solos. He did guitar solos, but Pete Willis's rhythm guitar tracks are still intact on this record. He's still giving credit, and yeah, you know, when Pete Willis when he got kicked out of the band, a lot of that bluesy kind of hard rock style pretty much left the band. So I think he had a lot to do with that sound. But you know, it is what it is. But yeah, Pyromania, my second favorite Def Leppard album, and I just enjoy this record so much. So now we're gonna get to my number one, and any of you out there that's a Def Leppard fan, you already know what my number one is. So that's High and Dry, released in 1981. This is the band's second album, and yeah, this is my favorite. This is my number one favorite Def Leppard album, High and Dry, and it's a lot of people's favorites. It's a lot of people's favorites, man. I hear a lot of people say that, yo, this is like one of their best albums. I agree. Honestly, I think High and Dry is their best album. I think it is their best album, and even with this record, you could tell that the band was moving away from the more British heavy metal sound of the first record. You can even with this record, this was actually really the beginning of them going to that more commercial sound, but still a heavy record though. Still heavy. It's still a heavy record that packs a punch. And yeah, I had to put it at number one because yeah, even though it's going through to that more commercial route like Pyromania, it packs more of a punch than Pyromania does. So let's get. Oh yeah, I think this was the first. Yeah, this was the first album that they actually worked with Mutt Lange on. Yeah, this was the first album where he was producer. And so let's get into some positives, man. For one, great production. The production is a vast improvement over their debut album. You know, so Mutt Lange did a great job on this record. And then I think it's their most consistent album. There are no weak songs on here. I can honestly tell you that there's no weak songs on here. There's not one song on this album that I listen to and I'm like, yeah, let me skip this. Every song on this album I want to listen to. I can actually listen to High and Dry all the way through. Same. I can do the same thing with Pyromania, but speaking on High and Dry, it's one of those albums where it keeps getting better with every song as the album goes through. And yeah, it's their most complete record. Great representation of their roots and the future. Like I was saying earlier, yeah, this was the first record where you started getting hints of them going to that more commercial route, but they still stayed somewhat grounded in those hard rock roots from the previous record. And it's just a great blend of that whole bluesy hard rock sound and the commercial style that they were implementing on here. Lots of great songs on here. You got Let It Go, that album opener. Awesome album opener. Another Hit and Run, which is, that's a killer song. Then you got the single High and Dry, Saturday Night. Bringing on the Heartache, which was a ballad, but an awesome ballad. You Got Me Running, the title track, On Through the Night. Mirror Mirror. Oh, and No No No, which is actually the last song on the album, the original album. Uh, Man, Joe Elliott. Let me talk about Joe Elliott. Yeah, I almost missed that one. Joe Elliott's vocals. This is where Joe Elliott really came into his own as a vocalist. That's where you got that signature sound from him. But the thing about this record, High and Dry, is that Joe Elliott's vocals are a bit harsher and aggressive on here. Now, when I say harsher or aggressive, I don't mean that he's doing like metalcore growls or death metal growls or anything like that. It's just that he's just really putting a lot of aggression, adrenaline behind his vocal approach. And No 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 is a great example, man. Like, if you have the album, because I have this on vinyl too. When it comes to the end of No No No, it keeps repeating. It keeps going no 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 until you take the needle off the record. But man, his vocal performance on here was just out of this world. I think this is his best vocal performance actually, because he really went hard on the vocals on here. And so let me see what else on here that I like. Oh yeah, if you have the CD version, it has two bonus tracks. Bringing on the Heartbreak remix, which I don't really understand why that was even added. But the song I want to talk about is Me and My Wine. Yeah, Me and My Wine. That's a great song right there. I don't know if it's still on certain CD versions. My CD version has the two bonus tracks, but I know that a few years ago they reissued the album without those two songs. But I think they added them on the 2018 reissue. But anyway, if you've never heard the song Me and My Wine, go on YouTube, check it out. There's a video for it. That's an awesome song. Heavy track, man. The riffs on that track are awesome, and of course Joe Elliott is killing it on the vocals, man. But let's get into some negatives. This was the last album. This was the last official album with Pete Willis, although his contributions were still kept on Pyromania. But this was the last album where he was a member of the band, where he was a part of the videos, and his photos were on the back cover and the liner notes. So yeah, this was the last album with Pete Willis, and I think, like I said when I was talking about Pyromania, I think when Pete Willis left the band, that's when a lot of that bluesy southern hard rock style pretty much left. And him and Steve Clark were a great combination. And that's not to say that Steve Clark and Phil Collen weren't good either. They were great too. But it's just that I think that Pete Willis was the one that brought that more harder and edgier side to the band. And well, I did have down that this was the last album with the British heavy metal influences, which it is, because you still, in some of the drumming, in some of these songs, you still get that British heavy metal influence in some of the songs. And yeah, after this record, yeah, they just started going more commercial after this one and Pyromania. And I think that the formula they had with the British heavy metal, but also blending it with the more radio friendly style, was a great marriage for the band. And I think that's something that Hysteria tremendously lacked on, which is why so many people kind of moved on away from Def Leppard when that record came out. But I think High and Dry was the best example of that marriage of those two like polar opposites, in my opinion. But yeah, High and Dry, man, that's my number one. That's my number one favorite Def Leppard album. Definitely pick up this record. If you are somebody that doesn't know much about Def Leppard, I honestly would tell you to start with either High and Dry or Pyromania, personally. But High and Dry, this is a fun record. I could talk about this album all night. It's a fun record. Every time I listen to it, man, I can imagine that back in '81 when this record came out, that you had a bunch of young teenagers at parties. Because I'm pretty sure that this album was like the soundtrack to so many parties back in the '80s, man. I can just imagine teenagers back then at parties outside getting drunk, and this being the background music, man. I mean, come on, the song High and Dry Saturday Night, that's pretty much about that's what that song's about. It's about partying. It's about having a great time on a Saturday night and getting drunk and high and doing whatever, man. Oh, and I guess I better mention this. This song was actually made on it was added to the Filthy 15 list by the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center. Yeah, this song was actually one of the songs added to that list. Because I'm looking at it right now. It says, this song made the Filthy 15, a list of songs criticized by the PMRC for having explicit lyrics that describe alcohol use and intoxication. The group's mission was to educate and inform parents about the growing trend in music towards lyrics that are sexually explicit, excessively violent, or glorify the use of drugs and alcohol, and to seek the censorship and rating of music. And in 2016, lead singer Joe Elliott commented on the alcoholic nature of the song, stated that during the recording of the album, producer Robert John Mutt Lange was attempting to turn him into a beer-swilling bastard in the music, which was not in real life. Okay, so, all right, didn't know that. I actually thought that Def Leppard was some pretty hard partying guys, but okay, but that's news to me. But yeah, that's what that song is really about, High and Dry. I mean, it has that whole vibe. Every time I listen to that song, I'm thinking about 1981, people having a keg party out in the woods somewhere, in a bunch of souped up cars, out just getting drunk and doing whatever. That's the kind of vibe that song has, man. This is a fun album, all in all, man. But yeah, High and Dry is a really fun album. But yeah, that's it for my albums ranking list, ranking the first 4 Def Leppard studio albums. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what you all think. Do you agree? Do you disagree with my ranking? And let me know what your rankings of these albums would be. Leave a comment. Show me what your rankings would have been. And as always, man, if you all could just hit that thumbs up and like this video, because when you hit that thumbs up, it actually sends my video recommendations where other people can find it. It basically gives me exposure. So if you could all do me a favor, just hit the thumbs up and like the video. Subscribe to the channel as well, because I got plenty of other videos on here that I'm doing. I got other albums ranking videos, CD collection videos, some old podcast episodes that I did a while back. Just check out the channel. Just check out the videos, and share it with anybody that you think that might be interested in it. And a big shout out to all my new subscribers. Cause I'm slowly but I'm steadily building up some more subscribers, man. That's why I'm staying so consistent with these videos. So shout out to all the new subscribers. Shout out to the old ones that have stuck by. And I hope that everybody has a blessed day and a blessed rest of the week. And as always, love, peace, and music. Peace out.